Today we're going to talk about soil. Episode 1 of the Growing Food series. I show you ways that you can grow on containers that you already have at home and how to use them in order to grow your vegetables, whether you have a tiny balcony or a small garden, or even if you want to grow indoors. I also show you some of the lighting that you can use to get your seeds to grow properly, and some of the seeds that you may want to start with. But today I am going to show you the biggest waste in the garden that if you're not careful, you can waste a lot of money. I was one of them. I wasted so much money on soil. I'm going to show you exactly how to figure out what kind of soil to prepare in order to get what you need. So let me show you exactly the method that I used to figure this out. And don't be concerned, you can do this too. So growing seeds can get expensive because of the soil. So I'm going to show you what I go ahead and calculate in order to know what to use and don't waste the money. So if I'm growing in these little cells, little containers, I know that my seedling will not be here for very long. I'm going to remove it and I'll pot it to something larger like this one or this one. And I won't have to put this amount of food in there, nutrients that would be needed if you are going to do it on one of these directly. So I'm going to use a seed soil, a basic seed soil. So this is the seed starting that I use, G&B, and I buy this at a Wilco's, which is my local garden center. So if I don't make my own and I just feel lazy, I go ahead and use this. And it's always done just fine. But making your own, you're going to save a lot of money. I don't need to have a bunch of compost and other things that are going to be really wasteful. Now, if the seedling is taking long to grow, then go ahead and put like a fish emulsion. Just make sure that it's not as strong as the bottle says, maybe a third of the way. So if it says a teaspoon, maybe use a third of a teaspoon or a quarter. Just make it a lot less strong because it's a baby and it doesn't take that much of a shock when you start feeding it. When your seedling is developing leaves that are the true leaves, they call it true leaves, the leaves that look just like the plant leaf is supposed to look. So the first two leaves, they're not the real leaves, they're just emerging. The next leaves, that's when you want to go ahead and up pot that plant. When you have at least 2 to 4 of those leaves, you find your pot and then you up pot them into that. So when it's a small cell, to go ahead and recap, you don't need to waste a lot of seed soil with compost and other nutrients. Now, if you want to make your own seed soil and not waste so much money on buying these bags, go ahead and make it. Let me show you a way that I can make my own soil, seed starting soil, and save a little bit of money so I don't have to use a seed starting soil that can get pretty expensive, especially right now. Let me show you what I use to do this. This is warm earth casting, so you can use a little bit of this and I'll go through the amounts, or you can use some compost. I use fish compost. Then it's perlite, and perlite, you see the larger scale of that helps with drainage. So your seedlings, once they grow, they're gonna need some of that, and even the little seeds as they grow, they will need some of this too. And then vermiculite, so if you don't have this, sometimes it just dries very quickly. This helps with water retention and damping off, so if you have the roots on something that is too soggy, it's gonna go ahead and rot away. So vermiculite to me is very, very important. So these 3, I would do vermiculite, perlite, and then a compost, and then on top, go ahead and use maybe a little bit of this on the top of it just to help it with nutrition. I want to show you, this is the worm castings that I use from Home Depot, and they're great. They're really dark like I showed you, but if I could find somebody locally that did this, I much rather buy from them. But I do like it. It works really, really well, and I am going to continue using it until I find someone locally. Like my worm tea is from a local source. It's all the way in Olympia, so it's pretty far away from me, but I'm gonna go online and see if I can get it online. So look for resources locally. I think it's a lot better. Okay, don't worry, it's really easy to make the mixture. all you do, if you have a container, let's say this is what you're using and you have a plastic container you're gonna put this in, I do 2 parts of either soil or coco coir. For flowers, I feel like the flowers are a little more finicky and they don't do well with coco coir for me. But for food, coco coir is just fine. So I will do 2 of these after you prepare your coco coir. And then I will do 1 of vermiculite, 1 of these containers, and then 1 of the containers of perlite. And that will help. If you add some compost, the only thing to keep in mind, I will do maybe half of this or 1 of these, depending. I just kind of look at it and see what I want to add for the plants I'm growing. But if you do 1 of these of compost, go ahead and sift it. I use this here to go ahead and get rid of all the chunks, because fish compost has a lot of bark in it, and those big chunks will not let the roots really grow well. It will not help with the drainage. It just doesn't keep the water there for the roots and the nutrients as well. So I take my time to sift it. I know it's an extra step, but it does help. You don't have to do it. They grow still. It may just be that they don't grow as well. But for me, the extra step is worth it. Sometimes gardening is just a matter of doing it and just feel like you're meditating and taking your time to just do what you're doing and enjoy the process. And this is sort of relaxing for me, so I do this. So you have 2 parts coco coir or the soil, 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite, and then half or 1, depending what you're growing and if it needs a lot of nutrients, if it's gonna be in the container for a really long time. An example is like ground cherries take forever. So I may do 1 of this of my compost, that whichever compost I decide to use. And I promise it's super simple. I'll also link a video where I prepare my soil. I take an extra step to put boiling water and cover it with aluminum foil, just to get anything that may be in there growing that I don't want it, so it prevents like the gnats from coming. I don't always do that. I don't always get gnats, so you don't have to do that. So if you feel overwhelmed, don't do that extra step. Just do what you need to do. What you could do is, once you get your seedlings into the up pot, just put vermiculite on top or sprinkle some cinnamon, and that will help with the gnats. They also sell those little sticky things you put on the top. I'll try to find a link and put it below. I've used that also, but I really don't have a big problem with gnats. But most of the time I put boiling water in the soil and let that cool off overnight, so I think that does help. But you don't have to do that. Do whatever is easy and doesn't bring you stress, and you'll see, you'll enjoy the process. Once you do it a couple of times, it will be natural and you'll know what to decide to use. I want to give you a couple of examples on how you will decide the soil that you'll use, if you're gonna put extra compost on it or not. So if I'm growing my pansies, this is where I grow my pansies, and it just makes it super easy. I put my soil, and then I am not going to move them, so I'm not gonna up pot them. Last year I kept them here. If I decide to do that, great, but I'm gonna assume I'm not gonna do that. I want the soil to be good because they're gonna be here for a really long time, so I want them to have plenty of nutrients. So that would be a time where I may add that compost and a little worm casting on top once I see them have the true leaves come up, and that will really help them. So a container like this, if you're gonna leave them and they take a long time to grow, that is a good one to go ahead and add food compost. Now, if you're growing, let's say in here, and you're just starting your tomatoes or you're starting your peppers in here, and they're only gonna be here until those true leaves come out and you're gonna up pot them, I don't add any of that fish compost or any compost that you want to use, because to me it's just wasted. I'll do the rest of it. If I see them that they're taking really long for some reason, my temperature's not right, it's just taking longer because it's cooler and where I'm keeping them, then go ahead and, you know, add some fish emulsion to it. Really light. Don't make it strong because they're babies, and that will work fine. If I am going to go ahead and use things like this big, I go ahead and just use a potting mix, an organic potting mix. I don't like anything that has chemicals in it, so I much rather find organic. Try to find the most affordable. I think I bought this one at Home Depot, and it was the most inexpensive one I could find. Now if I'm making my soil and I want to make my own, then I just use topsoil to do this type of containers when I pot my seeds. And the topsoil, if I don't want to use the coco coir, topsoil works really well. But if you don't feel like getting the topsoil, making your whole soil concoction as I showed you, then potting soil will work just fine. Let me know how it works for you, or if you have another way of doing this and have any tips on how we can save money, let the community know, because we all need help to be able to save money right now, and that would be so helpful for all of us. One last thing that I do, I keep my water in a specific area, because you don't want to be searching for a container to water when you have a lot of those little boxes to water. Make it really easy for yourself. So I'm going to show you where I keep mine, right next to my grow rack. This is where I keep mine. It's a little tray, but here's my watering can, and I keep a spray bottle on the top there, and that way they're handy and I don't have to keep searching for them. So these are two things that I use for fertilizing my seedlings, and not at the strength that it says here. I put probably a third or a quarter what it says. So warm tea is a great one. And the other one I like to use is kelp. And then the fish emulsion also. I don't think I have any of that left. I cannot find it, so I probably have to get some of that. But any of those, if you have one of those, that works just fine. Those will help you. You can even, if your seedlings are growing and you're having to keep them indoors more, you can always even do this worm tea. When you dilute it, you can put in a spray bottle and spray your leaves, and it is great for the seedlings as they're growing. So these are the ones that I keep the most and that I use the most in any of the seedlings that I'm growing. So pick one so you try one. The fish emulsion is great. It just has a really pungent smell. So if you don't want that, maybe one of these other two may work better, but try any of those, will work really good for you. One thing that you do need is gonna be the heat for some of your seedlings to grow. For example, peppers, tomatoes, things like that are gonna need 70 to 80 degrees. So I don't get that here. It's so cold here, and I'm in my garage. This is where my grow room is. If your area is that warm, then great. That's why you need to get it to germinate. I like this heat mask. I just put them vertical like this, and this is like a 10 by 20. I put them this way because I can fit probably 3 of these on it, or I can put them this way, however you want to do it. And I think it's like 3 to the back like this. So each of these cells have like 12 little seedlings, so this works just fine for me. So investing in a heat mat, if you don't have enough warmth in your area where you're growing, this is gonna be pretty critical. I will link it below. If you can find a local source, go ahead and buy that. But I will link this one. This is, I have a 20-inch deep rack. If you have a 24, this works, or you can get a larger one. I have one big one. The reason I don't do the large one is because once my seedlings have grown and I'm gonna up pot them, I take them off the heat mat and place them to the side. So I don't keep my seedlings on this all the time. Now keep in mind, there's again things that are not gonna be, this is not gonna be good for example, my pansies. They like a dark area and they like the cold, you know, they don't like this warm heat pad. My snapdragons, probably salad greens, many of them, you don't need to put them in a heat mat. So go ahead and take a look at that seed package, because that's gonna tell you, do your research. It's really critical you do some research as you grow and be able to get familiarized with what are the requirements of that type of plant before you go ahead and put your seedlings on a heat mat and then you do kind of kill the seed and it doesn't germinate. It's probably, I would say, a must if you don't have a warm area to grow in. Soil is the absolute foundation of anything that you're going to grow, and it's what is going to make your seedlings thrive eventually to get even more and more strong. So start the right way, take your time to understand it, and just go for it. And I know that this process is really fun. Once you start, you are going to go crazy growing things and realizing how much you can grow that is not in the supermarket, and you want to experiment and try. And eventually you're just going to narrow down the things that you use a lot and are able to use the most by saving the money in the supermarket. And that's okay. Experiment, have fun with it, but also be strategic, because right now foods are so expensive. So make sure you're growing enough of the things you're gonna use, and maybe a couple of plants to just have fun and experiment. So if you have questions, remember to ask me below or schedule a call for 30 minutes. I'm doing it completely free to try to help anyone that has questions. I want everybody to feel empowered to grow your own food, and we are going to take the power back, grow our own food, get healthy, and just encourage each other to create this community that will help each other grow for our mind, body, and soul.